Hello, and welcome back to another episode of General Conference Conversations, the podcast where we have conversations about General Conference. I'm your host, Kaylin, and today we get to talk about Elder Cook's talk, Be One with Christ. This is the last talk in the Saturday afternoon session of conference, this last conference. And I have a lot to say about this talk, so I just buckle up. As usual, as always, I encourage you to listen to this talk or read it or watch it before you come listen to me talk about it. Especially this time, I have so much to say. We'll see how long this ends up being and how much I actually end up saying. I have had this conversation now. I read this in church today. I have a horrible habit of reading and recording in the same day. And so I end up kind of scrambling, but it usually works out. This time around, I'm like, man, I should have given myself more time. I should have given myself more time to think about this and think about how I'm gonna say this, but I kind of talked about this all with my husband earlier after church, and I just did a Marco Polo to my best friend, trying to explain and put into words all of the thoughts that I had in my brain, because I read it during sacrament meeting, and then I get derailed during sacrament meeting because of what I'll get into. I read a source that he quotes, and I read the whole thing, and then I had thoughts about this one thing, and so I have all these notes written down on my library app that I was trying to type up on my phone, and it was just getting weird. And so I have most of it all written down, but it's going to be interesting to see kind of how I'm able to put this into words and, I don't know, try and make it relevant for a different audience, and also try not to ramble for 45 minutes because I just did that. I just did that on Marco Polo. So to recap, we're going to talk about one paragraph in his whole talk, but to kind of summarize his talk, of course, he's talking about being one with Christ, right? And it revolves around this one line from Christ's intercessory prayer, that we should be one with each other and be one with Christ. And he's talking about, he talks about it being kind of a relatively simple task to become one with Christ and to be unified with others. And he talks about it being all about our covenants and all about our choices, and that's a big portion of his talk, is discussing choices and agency and free will, and how we are free to choose what we value and we spend our time on, and in doing so then we choose to follow and be one in Christ or not, and then include others along the way and be one with them. And so that is really what I want to focus on, is this one paragraph that I got really stuck on. He says, on a recent cover of a major university alumni publication, a prominent biologist-professor asserts, "There's no room for free will." Not surprisingly, the professor is quoted in the article as saying, "There's no such thing as God, and there's no free will, and this is a vast, indifferent, empty universe." I could not disagree more strongly. And I read this paragraph, and I was like, this seems out of context, and this seems just kind of really black and white, and really it feels like there's more here, right? What is this guy, this professor, this biologist professor, what does he actually say, right? What does he actually believe, and what is his argument behind this, right? And so this guy's name is Robert Sapolsky, and I went and read this article. It's actually a really fascinating article. I highly recommend reading through it because it's really interesting to think about. And he He doesn't, the author of this article doesn't just talk about Professor Spolowski. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Sapolsky. It's a very interesting last name. Anyway, he doesn't just talk about him, he also quotes other philosophers in this kind of area and their thoughts on free will and kind of the debate about free will in the field of philosophy. It's actually really fascinating, so I'll put the link in the description if you're curious. And anyway, so this guy, his kind of main, he's not really profiling this guy, but kind of profiling this guy, Professor Sapolsky. He grew up Orthodox Jew, and when he was like 12, he found this verse in the Bible and like commentary on this verse in the Bible saying, in Leviticus, saying that a disabled man could not be made a priest. And he had worn leg braces growing up. I don't know what for, it doesn't say, but he saw himself in this, right? Like, I'm disabled, I can't become a priest. What are you talking about? So he went to his rabbi, talked to his rabbi, and his rabbi basically said something along the lines of, you know, you wouldn't give a blemished lamb as sacrifice. So in that same way, you wouldn't give God a blemished priest. And he thought that was completely unfair and absolutely ridiculous, and kind of his shelf broke, and he was like, this is dumb. And he was like 12 or something like that, and he woke up in the middle of the night and he did think this. He's like, I came to the conclusion that there's no such thing as God, and then I thought there's no free will, and then I thought this is a vast, indifferent, and empty universe, and everything started to make sense. And so of course this is all his personal like experiences, opinions, beliefs, right? And there are other philosophers who believe the same thing that he does. So his whole belief system is that there's no room for free will. Our decisions are all determined by something else, by our biology, by past trauma, by our culture, by the people around us. So every decision is impacted so much and influenced by so much that there is only one inevitable decision that we will make in any given moment, and therefore there is no free will, because everything is determined for us. So like every decision that we will make, it was locked into place a long time ago due to all of these different forces, and so we make decisions, quote unquote, but they are determined so much by outside forces that it's not free will. It's not our own free will. And so I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, that's an interesting way to look at life. And so there are other philosophers who think this. There's a whole field of philosophy about free will, and they debate it. They have debated it for forever. And obviously it's something that like we won't really know, right? We don't know why we make decisions. We just know that we make decisions. And so, but there's also on the other extreme end of it, right, of it is all our free will. It is only on us. We are the ones who define our destiny, and it is based completely on our own actions and our own decisions. That is how we shape our lives. And basically the world is our oyster. And then there are people in the middle who, I cannot say this word to save my life. It's compatibilityists, right? Like they believe that it's both, that there are definitely things that influence our choices, that they influence even what options we have, right? But at the end of the day, we do have a choice. We do have our own free will. And it basically comes down to like, how do you define free will? And like how granular that you get, and what can you really know about the why behind somebody's decision and all of that stuff, right? And I think I'm somewhere in between, and I think we believe that we are somewhere in between, right? I absolutely believe that we have a choice. We choose how our lives go. We can change the trajectory of our lives. But we are also influenced by the things around us. We are influenced by our past experiences, our biology, our families, our culture, and I think that's on purpose, right? And I'm trying to think of how I want to I have so many thoughts on this, and how do I want to structure this, and how do I want us to go? If we could do anything, and we weren't affected by the things around us, there wouldn't be opposition. Does that make sense? If we were placed alone with a perfect body on a blank planet with nothing to influence us, what would happen? What happened to Adam and Eve? They were put in they had perfect bodies. They had all of the food that they wanted. They didn't progress. There was no progression. There was nothing to work towards because there weren't choices to make. And so there has to be things that influence us. There has to be things that we can choose from. And so and we're not all gonna have all of the choices readily available to us. I'm trying to think of a thing that I don't have a choice to be. I don't know, on a smaller scale, right? I think about this when I was in high school. I went to a very tiny high school. There were 200 in the entire school. There's 50 in my graduating class. We were very limited to the extracurricular activities that were available to us. We didn't have a swim team. I don't think I have the ability to become a swimmer. Well, maybe now. I could probably try. I don't think I'll become an Olympic swimmer anytime soon. But I didn't have that option to be on a swim team, to even think about pursuing swimming as a career option, right? Or that wasn't as readily available. I'm sure that there were swim teams or swim clubs that I could have joined, right? But I didn't know that was an option. I wasn't presented with that as an option. We didn't have, a school newspaper. No, we did, but it was a class. It was weird. All I can think about is sports. The sports that we didn't have. But on the flip side, I had a lot more freedom and a lot more opportunity because it was such a small school. There were so few of us that every extracurricular activity was begging for people to join. And so there weren't volleyball tryouts. There wasn't auditions for the school musical. There was, but everybody got in, right? There are definitely things like the school musical and probably the volleyball team that I probably, if I had lived in a place that had a much larger school with 1,000 kids in it, I might not have made it. I might not have even tried out, right? I will never know. But I know that I had a lot of opportunities available to me because there were so few kids that I could do whatever I wanted. There were fewer options, but I had more options available. I had more realistic options. And so that is an example of having our choices limited, but also, right, that shows how our choices can be limited, influenced. And so now I'm going to backtrack to where I was. Our options are limited. And so there's things that are going to limit us, our lives are going to be guided in some certain way, right? There is a specific path that our life is going to go, even though it's quite broad. It's not everything, right? Everybody's life is still going to look different because of where they were born, where they grew up, who their parents are, who their siblings are, who their friends are, what school they go to. Like, your life is shaped by things you can't control, that you didn't choose, right? You choose what you make of that and going forward, but there are things that limit you to specific choices. And so, like, it's a fascinating, like, whole rigmarole. I'm trying not to get so philosophical and all of these things, because I was making a lot of connections about not just the gospel, but about how the world works and how we think about other people and about ourselves and politics and, like, all of this stuff, right? And really what it comes down to is, why is this important, right? Why is this a thing? Why am I saying all of this? Why is this so fascinating? And I think it can be really overwhelming. Like, I'm thinking about this and I'm like, wow, I'm gonna tell all my podcast viewers that literally everything that they do and everything that happens to them can affect their decisions later on, right? It doesn't cement your decisions, but it can affect them. So I was like, okay, if I heard that, if I was listening to a podcast and somebody said that, my little perfectionist brain would be going haywire and being like, well, that means I have to do everything right. I have to do everything perfectly. Like, every decision has to be perfect, every choice, every action. And that's literally impossible. And so, like, that's not what I'm trying to convey here, right? I'm not trying to say that, like, everything, well, I'm trying to say it a little bit, but I think what can be helpful about this way of looking at life is, one, you can cut yourself and others a little bit of slack, right? You can say, man, I did not make that choice well today. Like, that was a really poor decision, but I'm going to cut myself some slack because it was a really bad day. Like, I hadn't eaten a good breakfast. I was hungry. I was angry. I'm feeling emotional because of this, that, and the other thing, right? I was having a really crappy day. I'm going to do better next time. And same thing for other people. We are able to cut others a little bit of slack of, like, oh, well, they made this decision and part of it's on them and part of it's their fault and they should be sorry for it, but also I'm going to understand that, like, their mental health's not great today, or their mother just died, or they just don't have the skills for this, or they don't have the knowledge about this, or they just don't understand, right? You can, like, see what affects people's actions for things that they can't control, or even things that they can control, right? Being like, they made this really bad choice, but it's okay, I'm going to cut them some slack. And on the other hand, like, I also know myself, right? I made this poor decision today and I could have done better, right? I have the knowledge to not make a decision like this. I have my self-awareness to not make a decision like this. I can do better next time, to kind of improve and like move forward on this, right? And so I think that's where the duality of it comes in, right? Of, like, we absolutely have a choice, and that's really empowering to know that we have a choice to make our lives the way that we want to make them, with the help of God, right? Like, this all obviously is a gospel podcast. But, like, we have that free will, we have that agency, right? And so we can make these choices, and we can decide to read our scriptures, and we can decide to go to the temple or whatever. Like, we have all of these choices, but it can also be really relieving and really also empowering to know that there's some things that we cannot control. We cannot control other people. We cannot control the weather, right? Like, our days are going to be interrupted and affected by things outside of our control, and other people are going to be affected by things that they can't control. And so I think that's so, like, that duality can give us so much peace of mind of like, okay, I'm doing the best that I can, I'm making the best decisions that I think that I can. I'm gonna mess up sometimes it's my control and sometimes it's not, and I can do better next time. Like, I think that's what I took away from this, is just so much like relief and peace, right? And so I don't know, like, I think about that. I think about, like, I'm trying to find, like, I was trying to figure out what question to ask, right? I always try to think of a question, and I think just being aware of this, right? Being aware of the fact that we all have advantages and disadvantages in our lives. And so be aware of it for ourselves and be aware of it for other people. So, like, I guess my question is, and maybe it's more of like an invitation, is just to, like, be aware of it. To, like, in the next day, after you listen to this, notice it. Notice, like, how your decisions are affected by the things around you. And it might be something really silly, like, why did I eat a banana this morning? Right? And you might not know. Like, oh, well, I was craving a banana. Well, why were you craving a banana? It just sounded good, right? And I could go all the way down to, why did I snap at my husband this afternoon? Well, I was hungry. I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. I was dehydrated. I was frustrated at something else, and I took it out on him, right? And, you know, I still could have done better. I still could have not snapped, but all these things also ramped up to me being really frustrated, and I snapped at my husband. And so, and on the other side too, like, am I using my past experiences with the Spirit to inform my decisions now? Like, my experiences with God, am I building on those? Am I using them to better myself? And then, like, am I letting everything impact me negatively, right? Like, am I listening to people saying, you're not good enough, or you shouldn't do that? It can go both ways. And so that's my invitation to this very long, I hope it makes sense, rant. And, like, all of my thoughts still a little bit jumbled about this really fascinating subject. I hope this makes sense. And that's my invitation, is to try and notice how things around you affect your decisions, and what of those things that are affecting you can you control and what can you not. How can you seek to be better and strive to be better, but also cut yourself some slack because of things that aren't in your control. Yeah, I think it's very much a part of the plan, right? It is a part of why we are here. There's opposition, there's balance. Part of it is in our control, part of it is not, and we are in control of how we react to those things that are not in our control. And I think that's very much divinely inspired and divinely planned that way. So anyway, I think as I was, like, trying to sum this up, I was summing it up for my best friend. I was like, I think that's why this paragraph from Elder Cook kind of rubbed me the wrong way, is it sounds like he's disagreeing with everything, right? And I understand he's disagreeing with the conclusions that this guy comes to, right? This Professor Sapolsky, he comes to the conclusion, right, that there's no free will, and therefore nobody should be rewarded or punished, because nothing that you do is actually up to you. That's, like, his whole thing. That there's no free will. Every decision is made for you in years past. You'll never know what made you make that decision, but it's not up to you, and therefore we should not reward or punish anybody. And so I understand why Elder Cook is upset with that conclusion, but I think we agree with the argument. The argument that he's making is that our decisions are influenced by everything around us. And like, that's what this whole thing has been about, right? Like, I agree with his argument, I don't agree with his conclusion. So anyway, that's why it kind of felt kind of flippant for Elder Cook to just quote this one thing in this article and then go on to say, well, a fundamental doctrine of our faith is that we do have agency and we do have free will and we have the ability to choose and act. And he does like mention it a little bit, right, of like, we live in a competitive world and we live in a world where things affect us and like we have no control over things. Like he does say that a little bit, but he just hammers home this, but we do have free will and we do have choices. And so I just wanted to put a little bit more context and a little bit more nuance to that, of like, we do have free will and we do have choices. We can determine our fate, but there are things that are affecting that, and there are things that are limiting that. And it's totally fine if you like disagree with me completely, right? This is what I've come to. This is what the connections that I was making. And so I really, really do want to hear your thoughts about this. This one's specifically, like, I really, really want to hear what you think, right? Drop a comment or send me a message, or you can head over to Instagram and Facebook or an email or anything like that. Like, I really, really do want to hear your thoughts on this and have a conversation, because I think it's really fascinating and a very, very interesting thing that, I mean, obviously many, many philosophers have many, many discussions and debates about. So thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to y'all next time.